Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. Now, from time to time, some people come up in life who personify wickedness and evil and horror to the extent that sometimes you wonder that if they died and they went to hell, if there is one, whether the devil himself will be ready to accept them because they are just so evil, the devil might feel jealous and feel challenged in his own hell. That's just by the way. Today's true crime story is about one such person called Derico Nwamama, a notorious armed robber who existed in Nigeria in the late 90s into the early 2000s. You will hear a lot of the things that he did, dastardly and horrific things. But please, trust me, this is not a movie. This guy existed. He did everything that I'm going to tell you about. If you are not sure or if you doubt it, you can Google his name and Google will confirm everything that I'm saying. If you are ready for this ride, buckle up and let's go. So his real name is Okudili Indiwi, but on the streets, to his victims and his accomplices, he was known as Derico Nwamama. Now, we are going to go into his genesis and you would see how a humble boy would evolve to become a very notorious armed robber who would end up terrorizing the lives of a lot of people in the country called Nigeria. Derico started out as a street urchin in a town called Onitsha, and then, after some time, he graduated to being a pickpocket, and then, ultimately, to becoming a dreaded criminal whose mere mention sent shivers down the spines of every single human being in the entire southeast part of Nigeria. And just so we are on the same page, this included police officers as well. This is how Derico Nwamama rose to his notorious fame. Long before Derico became famous for his exploits in the city of Onitsha, the entire Anambra state was under the control of another ruthless, merciless, and cold-blooded armed robber called Chijina. Now, under the reign of Chijina and his gang, all residents of Onitsha were living in fear, and in fact, police officers were just numb and cowardly silent because they knew they were not safe. There's a story told that on the 16th of February 1999, 2 days after Valentine's Day, Chijina, acting on a tip-off, besieged a family hoping to get money from the man of the house. But unfortunately, the man didn't come home with any money because he had deposited the money at the bank before coming back home. It is reported that Chijina became so enraged that he grabbed the man's 4-month-old son, threatened to throw the baby from a 3-story building if the man and his wife were not forthcoming with his demands. Chijina flung the baby from 3-story up and shot the man twice in the head when he realized that they had nothing for him. So that's how ruthless Chijina was. And guess what? Chijina is the one who trained Derico. They became friends. So we are going to see how Derico would evolve to become worse than Chijina, the guy who threw a 3-month-old baby from a 3-story building just because he couldn't get any booty from his attempted robbery. In fact, reports had it that Chijina also forced families to have incest in front of him for his own amusement during his robberies. he forced fathers to sleep with their daughters and mothers to sleep with their sons. If you refused, it meant sudden death for you, instant execution by his hands. I told you earlier, this is not a movie. These guys existed. This is looking at how Derico would come up, and he is currently under the tutelage and friendship of the notorious Chijina. Derico and Chijina were very good friends at that time, and also colleagues in the armed robbery business, a friendship that started during the famous Aguleri War. But Derico was not based in Onitsha at the time. He was based in Abuja. That was the Federal Capital Territory, and he only visited Onitsha from time to time to carry out his robbery operations with maximum terror. So he was learning the ropes, but they became friends. And after raining a torrent of bullets and gunfire upon the ill-equipped police officers of the Nigerian police and defenseless Nigerians, Derico would then go back to his safe haven in Abuja with his loot and just enjoy until he needs to strike again. Unfortunately, in 1999, it is reported that trouble started looming because the indigents were complaining that these armed robbers were giving them too much trouble, and as such, they couldn't live their lives in peace. They couldn't even have normal celebrations like Christmas in peace. So a meeting was held. The youth of the towns called for a meeting where they invited both Chijina and Derico in an effort to strike a bargain with them, because obviously they knew the police had failed them. So they decided to call for a parley or a deal with the two top armed robbers to strike an understanding with them so that at least they would have some leeway in their lives as well. Now, Chijina and Derico were present at this meeting, but after the meeting, Chijina refused to stand down. In fact, he attacked some members of the youth who had called them, and he even became more ruthless in that state as payback to them for trying to get him to back down in that manner. So he was just not ready to play ball in any way. Now, the youth sought to help get rid of Chijina, so they went to talk to Derico, and they were trying to get him to move to their side so that together they can get rid of Chijina. But it didn't yield much fruit, so they decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. Now, they managed to convince Derico and some special police officers, who then decided that, okay, they've bought into the deal, and now they were going to raid Chijina and his gang and get rid of them. On the third day, the operation took place, but unfortunately for the youth and the members of the operation, it was not totally successful, because when they struck, Chijina was not present at the time, but some members of his gang were present, and they were rounded up and sent to the central police station at Onitsha. So that was the first blow delivered to Chijina and his gang by the police in concert with Derico, whom Chijina considered as a very good friend of his. So at this point, Chijina learned what had happened, and he felt betrayed by his bosom friend Derico. And of course, being the armed robber and the criminal and a ruthless one, of course, as he was, the first thing that came to mind was payback. So without thinking, Chijina called on his right-hand man, and he asked him to take him to Derico's parents' house. This is why it gets sad, because once Chijina got there, he met Derico's father, and immediately, without provocation, he just opened fire on the man and killed him. He riddled him with a lot of bullets just because of what his son, Derico, had done with the police against him. Now, the die was cast, the battle lines were drawn now. Derico also heard what had happened, that Chijina had gunned down his father. Now, upon hearing this, Derico set out with only one thing on his mind: revenge, payback for what Chijina had done to his father. Derico ran into Chijina and instantly, without even mincing words, just started shooting at him mercilessly, pumping bullets into the so-called great Chijina, who had been alleged to be invincible to bullets because of charms and other stuff that he had. He was shot rampantly by Derico, and the force of the gunshots got him into a gutter. It didn't end there. Derico brought him out of the gutter, put him in a wheelbarrow, and started pushing him to the police station. Chijina, at this point, was still alive and pleaded with Derico to end his life and not take him to the police station alive. I think it's because he knew that with the notorious things that he's done, with the level of notoriety that he had, if he's sent to the police station, he's going to go through a whole lot of hell with the legal system, and he was not ready to go through that. So, being the criminal that he was and thinking he was that tough, it looks like he wanted to go out on his shield. And Derico obliged. He gave him the final shot that ended his life. He still kept him in the wheelbarrow and pushed him to the police station. And upon getting to the police station, surprisingly, the police officers were happy to see Chijina dead in the wheelbarrow and were dancing and celebrating and thanking Derico for what he had done for them and the town. They lifted Derico up as their hero and celebrated him as the king of the town. But little did they know that they had just crowned the devil as the king and protector of that town. Because on that day, at that moment, a new version, a more ruthless version of Derico was now born. The police failed to comprehend the fact that the death of Chijina meant that Derico did not have any competition anymore. It meant that he was the undisputed top dog in that town as far as crime was concerned, and that he was going to metamorphose into another force that they would still have to deal with, just like they were having problems with Chijina. But some way, somehow, it seems they were so short-sighted, they just celebrated the death of Chijina and didn't think so much into it that Derico is going to evolve afterwards and they will have another problem in dealing with him. From there, Derico, the ruthless and more horrific version, was born. He would issue threatening messages to the police and would also tell them that they are going to pay for the killing of some members of his gang. The threats would go to the police officers and their family members as well. So the same guys who were celebrating him for killing Chijina, the topmost armed robber at the time, were now facing the same treatment that Chijina was giving them. That is how short-sighted the police was. They celebrated the problem for eliminating a problem, thinking that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Little did they know, in this case, the enemy of their enemy is still their enemy because of where he stands in the eyes of the law and where they stand. They can't be friends. Now, fast forward, the reign of terror of Derico escalated. Even traders could not display their wares in peace, and many people slept with one eye open. Derico drove commercial banks out of the town, by taking a lot of money from them through robberies. He just carted away millions of naira from the banks, and the police were too weak and ill-resourced and cowardly to fight back. So Derico was just having his way. Travelers who had to pass through that town held their breath, expecting that Derico could strike at any time, and truly Derico did not disappoint. He would strike because he knows there won't be any resistance from the police or anybody for that matter. But as has always been the case, somebody would eventually step up. A force would come up to be reckoned with when injustice persists for some time. And so it happened that the governor of the state became so worried on how the menace of Derico was just getting out of hand. He was described as the personification of terror, and the mere mention of his name just sent people running. There were rumors that he had spirits, he was a god of a sort, and he could disappear and reappear. There were so many things around Derico that people just were so afraid to hear his name. He took over people's lands, businesses, wives, and all his members in his family got away with anything that they did because they were related to Derico. So the criminal was enjoying a sort of diplomatic immunity, not backed by law, but just backed by his criminal notoriety. And his family members were also enjoying it. At the time, he was said to be invisible and could not be arrested. So the hype was also thrown in the mix, and it just gave the guy so much history, and people were so afraid of him. According to reports, Derico Nwamama killed over 200 people, including 25 police officers, whose lives he just wasted. He was a master of countless batch robberies and would not blink twice before executing people who either didn't comply or tried to stand up to him and his gang. After successful robberies, he would boast and declare himself invincible. Derico seemed to have placed a lot of faith and confidence in the charms which had been prepared for him by traditional witch doctors. He felt that he was so powerful because he believed in these rituals that had been done for him and the charms that have been given to him. If you are not familiar with the African life, these things are very common, especially among criminals. They go and consult with witch doctors and traditionalists and traditional priests for that matter to prepare charms for them. It's alleged that some of these charms can make you bulletproof. Some can make you invincible to any attack, be it a knife, bullets, anything. Some can actually give you the powers to disappear, as has been alleged. But funny enough, we would see how these charms would turn out in the end. And like I said, this is not a movie. This guy existed. He existed in the late 90s into the early 2000s in Nigeria, West Africa, a country that is independent or was independent at that time, had a constitution, had laws, had a police force to enforce the law. This guy was existing and doing all these things that I'm telling you about. So the governor was not the only one who was worried about the reign of terror being perpetrated by Derico. In fact, even the president at the time, Olusegun Obasanjo, was enraged that a criminal was left to unleash such terror in a town, in an independent country like Nigeria. Like I said, they were independent, so it's a bit surprising that you have a criminal having such freedom to operate, and you still have police forces in such towns saying that they are there to serve and protect. What were they actually doing? The police were helpless and had lost many men to the dreaded bandits, and it seemed that they were at their wits' end on what to do to bring him and his gang to book. Now, in May 2001, the Anambra State Police Command launched the Operation Derico, which was aimed at capturing Derico and his gang members at all costs. The police managed to arrest some of Derico's men, but he was still elusive as he kept operating with reckless abandon, robbing, killing, and kidnapping innocent Nigerians. But little did he know that his fall was near. In December 2000, Derico and his gang committed the worst crime known to man till date. They attacked a 59-seater luxurious bus filled to the brim at the popular Upper Iweka. The bus was about to leave for Lagos, and after robbing every single person in the bus, they decided to kill everybody on board. This included women and children, and the devil himself, Derico, issued out the orders that his men should shoot all the passengers, execution style, and after which they left them for dead. Out of the 59 passengers, only 4 people survived. So you see how the guy is escalating from pickpocket to armed robbery to mass murders. This guy felt he was a god in himself. After that horrible incident, the then governor of the Anambra State didn't have any other choice but to bring in the dreaded Bakassi Boys to help save the state. Now, you would ask, who are these Bakassi Boys? The Bakassi Boys are a vigilante group. So, the police had failed, and now you have a governor resorting to bring in a vigilante group to come and deal with the notorious criminal. Question his actions, question his decision, but we will find out whether it was effective. I don't know if the phrase that the end justifies the means would apply here in the case of this governor's decision, but it shows that his back was against the wall. They had gotten to a point where Derico had just evolved into something the law could not even contain. So the Bakassi Boys were brought in, and on Tuesday, July 3rd, 2001, the Bakassi Boys got to work. Little did Derico know what was in store for him. He was going about his life just terrorizing people. But on this date, the 3rd of July 2001, Derico was on a bus going from one town to the other. But on getting to where he was headed, that's Onitsha, the Access Bridge, the dreaded Bakassi Boys stopped the bus. Sensing danger, the crime lord jumped through the window to run away, but before he could escape, the closest Bakassi member to him on the scene brought out a knife and chopped off his left ear. And just like that, they halted his escape and Derico was arrested. So you see how this is going. The law has been after this guy for so long. Police officers, 25 of them had been killed. The governor brings in a vigilante group, and in the first meeting, this guy is captured. The so-called invisible guy with so many charms, he could be a god, is just captured. And from what I gather, the Bakassi Boys also had their own charms. They also came fortified, so As the physical battle was going on, I'm sure if the champs were anything to go with, behind the scenes, they would be battling as well. And for a man who thought he was above the law and could not be captured, it was very funny and actually disappointing how he started crying and pleading for his life when the Bakassi Boys apprehended him. They took him to a hospital for treatment because he was bleeding profusely. And when the news of his capture broke, every single human being in the Anambra state celebrated as if it was the second coming of Christ. And indeed, Derico had met his end in an awful manner. Before then, the Bakassi Boys had developed a terrible and blood-chilling reputation for dealing with suspects, and Derico's days were surely numbered from when he was caught by them, because you could just tell that he was on his way to a Bakassi Boys styled execution. On the 9th of July 2001, 6 days after Derico was captured by the Bakassi Boys, the Bakassi Boys did to him what many had earlier predicted. So they picked Derico up on 3rd of July, and as at the 9th of July, they still had him in their custody. So what were the police doing? You could see how inefficient the police was at the time, that a vigilante group would actually come in as the last resort after the police had failed, and they get to pick the guy, and they still get to keep the guy for about 6 days. Well, that is another conversation for another day. So, chanting war songs, the Bakassi Boys drove in their convoy around the town and ended at the Uchanja Market Junction along the popular Upper Iweka Road in Onitsha. As their buses came to a halt, shouts of excitement and expectation filled the air. Many knew the fate that would befall Derico, so they all trooped to the spot to witness the final judgment on him. The Bakassi Boys dragged Derico out of the bus, and Derico was looking so severely beaten, and you could see he was broken, and he had that trademark vigilante group beating all around him. His body had cuts and gashes, and these were testaments to what he must have gone through in their hands in those 6 days. He must also have known that the day of reckoning had come for him. Derico was in obvious pains, but no one seemed to care, and understandably so. Not that I agree, but I understand where the people are coming from if they don't care that he's in pain. Still chanting war songs and egged on by the enchanted crowd, one of the commanders of the Bakassi Boys addressed the crowd, telling them they were in the state not for politics, but to fight crime. He handed over the microphone to the now trembling Derico, who, now like a coward, began begging for his life to be spared. This is where you see the irony of the whole thing. This is a guy who executed people after he had even robbed them, killed several people, over 200 people with 25 police officers, and when it's his time, he is now pleading for mercy. Funny. He made feeble attempts at declaring his innocence. This was what he said: "My name is Odi alias Derico, alias Nwamama. I appeal to you, the people of Anambra State. Please don't kill me. I don't like evil. It was when I killed Chijina that people thought I'm a strong guy. You know, I trust Bakassi Boys. They are strong. Please, mercy for me. Nobody can identify me as having robbed him. People just believe that I am a strong guy." So at this point, he is just trying to turn the whole thing around. But it didn't work. He confessed that while he was on the run, he was sheltered by a member of the National Assembly in Abuja. He also confessed that he had two other powerful protectors, one being a member of the Anambra State House of Assembly, while the other was the chairman of a local government council. I just don't understand why most often when the most wanted criminals are being sought for or finally arrested, you would have politicians or some politicians who are actually part of the chase helping them. Now, what was to follow remains one of the most bloodiest displays of public executions in Nigeria to date. With the speed of light, a cutlass handled in the strong arm of one of the Bakassi Boys just came flashing down with an unforgiving thud, and it landed on Derico's slim neck in a flash. Derico had been beheaded. Now, I'll pause here and still remind you that this is not a movie. This is happening in 2001, 9th of July 2001, in Nigeria, West Africa, an independent country with laws, constitution, a police force, a military force, and all that is in between. This is happening in broad daylight, and it is happening by a vigilante group who had been contracted by a governor after the police had failed to deal with a ruthless and notorious armed robber. Are you with me now? Let's continue. Derico was beheaded, and he was just 22 years. Can you believe that? With all these atrocities being perpetrated by him, he was just 22 years old. His severed head rolled on the floor before the crowd while his convulsing body collapsed on the ground, with bright red blood gushing from his neck. It was as if a sacrifice to the gods had just been taking place. And that's how bloody the end of Derico was. But it didn't end there. You would ask, the guy has been beheaded. What else is left? Trust you me, there was still more to come. These Bakassi boys did not come to play, and their reputation preceded them. The crowd was satisfied, and as far as the Bakassi boys were concerned, that was a clear lesson and message to any criminal bent on making life miserable for the Anambrarians. With the lifeless remains of Derico still lying on the floor, the people erupted in jubilation, shouting, dancing, and screaming out of joy, and exchanging mutual congratulations for what had finally ended in the chapter of Derico. But it still wasn't the end. What would follow would be razor-sharp machetes flying from different directions to chop the remains of Derico's body into sizable chunks. The chunks were then heaped up, properly rinsed with fuel, and then set on fire. They burnt Derico to ashes. Now, it's difficult. When I did the research on this true crime story, I just couldn't understand why it could get to this point in an independent country with the police, military, and all that is in between around. How can it get to this point? Yes, the guy had done some atrocities, but he deserved a trial at the very least. And that was how it ended for Derico Nwamama. Subscribe to the channel if you are yet to do so. Leave us your comments on this true crime story. What do you think? This is just in the year 2000. How can this have happened let me know what you feel about this true crime story and the person by name Derico Nwamama. But as always, like I would say, wherever you find yourself, whatever you do, stay safe out there.